You press your thumb into the fence post and the wood collapses like wet cardboard. 8 years ago, this fence was sealed with a coating that promised decades of protection. Now moisture is trapped underneath and the boards are rotting from the inside out. Meanwhile, outside Boone, North Carolina, there are mountain barns built before 1900 still standing on timber, treated with a white mineral powder that cost Appalachian families less than $1 a bag during the Depression. And the United States Department of Agriculture record explaining why still exists. The first time I drove into Watauga County, North Carolina, I was chasing a completely different story. A week of heavy rain had washed out parts of the mountain roads near Valle Crucis, and I had been filming old tobacco barns that most people barely notice anymore. Some of them looked ready to collapse from a distance. Gray wood, sagging roofs, rusted hinges hanging crooked in the rain. That is where I met Raymond Fletcher. Raymond was 78 years old, wearing faded brown overalls and standing beside a barn his grandfather built in 1912. The structure sat halfway up a hill surrounded by chestnut and poplar trees. Rain had been hitting that mountain for days, yet the siding still looked dry. I walked over and pressed my knuckles against one of the boards, expecting soft wood. Instead, it sounded hard, dense, almost hollow in the way old-growth lumber sounds when it is still healthy inside. Then Raymond told me something I still think about. That barn had never been painted. No stain, no polyurethane, no modern weather sealers. He said his grandfather treated the wood with something the family called mountain milk. I assumed he meant ordinary whitewash until he laughed and shook his head. Then he said something that completely contradicted everything most homeowners are told today. Wood starts dying the second you stop letting it breathe. That sentence followed me all the way back down the mountain. And once I started digging through agricultural records from the 1930s, I realized those old families may have understood wood better than the companies selling products for it today. And what I found in those archives changed the entire story. Modern wood protection is built around one idea: seal everything completely. That sounds reasonable until you remember wood is constantly moving. Heat expands it, cold contracts it. Humidity moves through the fibers every single day, even when the surface looks dry. The problem is many modern coatings create a hard outer shell that eventually cracks with weather and sunlight. Once moisture slips underneath, it becomes trapped inside the grain where air can no longer circulate properly. The outside still looks protected while the inside quietly begins breaking down. And those cracks always come. Most homeowners now repaint or reseal fences, sheds, and decks every few years. Over decades, many people spend more maintaining outdoor wood than the lumber originally cost. What stopped me cold while researching this was discovering that the National Park Service still describes Limewash as a breathable coating that allows trapped moisture to escape instead of sealing it inside structural wood. That single detail explains why Appalachian families approached wood preservation differently. Instead of trapping moisture out completely, they focused on helping wood dry faster after storms. And that is why some of those mountain barns are still standing more than a century later, while many modern decks struggle to survive a decade without major repairs. But the strange part is what they used cost almost nothing. Subscribe if you want to uncover the forgotten methods that once made American homes and farms last for generations. The material Raymond Fletcher showed me was hydrated lime, calcium hydroxide. Today it sits mostly ignored on the lower shelves of feed stores and farm supply buildings in plain paper bags that cost less than $10. No glossy labels, no expensive branding, just a simple mineral most people barely notice anymore. But long before synthetic waterproof coatings took over hardware stores, families across Appalachia relied on hydrated lime to preserve barns, fencing, smokehouses, and rough-cut lumber through decades of rain, snow, and humid summers. The mixture itself was simple: hydrated lime, skim milk, salt, raw linseed oil. Frontier families mixed those ingredients into a thin mineral wash that soaked deep into the wood fibers instead of sitting on top like paint. That difference changes almost everything. Modern paint behaves almost like wrapping damp wood in plastic. Once cracks form, moisture gets trapped underneath and rot slowly spreads from the inside out. Lime behaves differently. It hardens within the grain while still allowing moisture vapor to escape naturally after storms and humidity. The National Center for Preservation Technology and Training documented that traditional lime washes remained highly durable on historic structures and performed even better when modified with natural additives. When I asked Raymond why his grandfather trusted it so completely, he rested his hand against the barn wall and said, "The wood never stayed wet long enough to die." But here is where the story becomes even stranger. Because Raymond's family quietly added one extra ingredient almost nobody remembers anymore. Most people assume newer building products replaced older methods because they performed better. But once you start digging through old agricultural records and preservation bulletins, you realize that is only part of the story. Sometimes products survive because they create recurring customers. And there is a major difference between something designed to last and something designed to be reapplied every few years. The exterior coating industry in the United States generates tens of billions of dollars annually through paints, deck stains, waterproofing products, wood restoration chemicals, and maintenance systems. Add in contractor labor, replacement lumber, sanding equipment, and recurring repair work, and the numbers become enormous. Entire industries benefit when outdoor wood constantly needs attention. A mineral treatment that protects structures for decades using inexpensive materials from a feed store does not fit naturally inside that economy. Nobody spends millions advertising hydrated lime. Nobody sponsors home improvement television shows explaining how Appalachian families preserved wood before synthetic coatings existed. And over time, people stopped expecting outdoor structures to survive for generations. After World War II, suburban construction exploded across America. Chemical coatings became easier to mass produce, easier to package, and more profitable to sell repeatedly. Bright finishes replaced mineral treatments. Marketing replaced local building traditions. Slowly, older preservation methods disappeared from county extension programs, contractor education, and hardware store recommendations. Not because they stopped working, because industrial systems rewarded replacement cycles instead. And eventually homeowners accepted something earlier generations would have considered completely normal. The idea that fences, decks, sheds, and barns should constantly need repainting, resealing, and rebuilding, but buried inside agricultural archives from the 1920s and 1930s, another version of the story still survives. And the deeper I went into those records, the harder it became to ignore what older families already understood. The reason Appalachian families trusted this method for generations is because it was simple enough for almost anyone to make without specialized tools or expensive materials. You did not need a contractor. You did not need power equipment. Most families mixed it themselves beside the barn using whatever containers they already owned. You can still do it the same way today in a single afternoon. Start with 1 pound of hydrated lime, 1 gallon of skim milk, 2 tablespoons of table salt, and 1 tablespoon of raw linseed oil. Pour everything into a large plastic bucket and stir slowly with a wooden stick until the mixture turns smooth and thin, like watered-down paint. Never use a metal bucket if you can avoid it. Older farm bulletins warned that lime reacts with certain metals over time and weakens the mixture. Before applying anything, use a stiff brush to knock loose dirt, dead fibers, and peeling material off the surface. You are not trying to strip the wood completely bare. You are opening the grain so the mineral wash can sink deeper inside. Apply the first coat with a wide natural bristle brush and let it dry for 24 hours. The second coat goes on the next day. At first, the wood will look pale and slightly chalky. By the second week, the surface begins tightening and hardening. After a month, rainwater no longer soaks deeply into the grain the way it used to. By the second month, the boards feel noticeably drier after storms. And the strangest part is what happens years later. Because the deeper I dug into old agricultural archives, the more I realized this was never considered unusual in rural America. Last winter, I drove to Lexington, Kentucky, after hearing about a collection of pre-war agricultural preservation records stored beneath the University of Kentucky Library. Most of the material had not been touched in decades. The basement smelled like old paper, machine oil, and damp wood. Inside a gray archival box marked Rural Structure Bulletins 1930-1938, I found a USDA field circular dated 1934 written by Agricultural Extension Agent Thomas E. Callahan. The title stopped me cold. Mineral Preservation Washes for Rural Structures. I sat there for almost an hour reading it page by page under a dim archive lamp. Callahan described Appalachian families using lime and casein mineral coatings on barns, fencing, smokehouses, and feed sheds across eastern Kentucky and western North Carolina. One line from the report stayed with me longer than anything else. He wrote that properly treated structures often survive for multiple generations with little observable structural decay. Not experimental, not rare, normal. That was the part that bothered me most driving home that night. Earlier generations fully expected outdoor structures to last 50 or 60 years with minimal maintenance. They built with the assumption that wood should survive long after the original owner was gone. Somewhere along the way, that expectation disappeared. Today, people think constant repainting, resealing, and replacing is simply part of owning property. But holding that document in my hands made one thing painfully clear. America once treated durability as a standard, not a luxury. And there was still one final detail hidden inside those records that almost nobody remembers anymore. Whenever older building methods come up, the first reaction is usually skepticism. And honestly, that makes sense. Most people have spent their entire lives being told modern coatings are the only reliable way to protect outdoor wood. The first question is always safety and effectiveness. Hydrated lime has been used on agricultural structures for centuries, but proper mixing matters. Too much lime creates a brittle coating. Too little weakens the protection. That is why older farm bulletins were extremely specific about measurements and application. And if you are still unsure, do not start with your entire deck. Pick one fence post or one weathered section and watch how it behaves through a full rainy season. The second objection is usually practical. People say their situation is different. Their wood is older. Their climate is wetter. Their structure already has layers of stain or paint on it. And that is fair. This method tends to work best on rough-cut lumber. Older fences, sheds, barns, and weathered outdoor wood that can still absorb mineral coatings into the grain. Even partially sealed surfaces often improve once loose synthetic layers are brushed away. And if you are still uncertain, test one hidden area first before committing to a larger project. Then comes the final objection. My contractor says modern sealers are better. For cosmetic appearance, many modern products absolutely create smoother finishes and richer color tones. That part is true. But appearance and long-term durability are not always the same thing. And once you begin comparing the lifespan of old agricultural structures against modern replacement cycles, the conversation starts becoming a lot more uncomfortable. Because the final piece of this story explains why older families understood something most people no longer expect from building materials anymore. You did not lose this knowledge because it stopped working. You lost it one generation at a time, while constant repair slowly became normal. Older families expected wood to last for decades, not just until the next maintenance cycle. And more people are starting to ask why those old barns and sheds survived longer with fewer chemicals and less upkeep, not because the past was perfect, because practical knowledge mattered. So now I want to hear from you. What is the oldest wooden structure you have ever seen still standing today? And if you enjoy uncovering forgotten American methods like this, subscribe and stay close. In the next video, I am going to show you the Depression-era mineral trench system families used to keep root cellars dry without pumps or electricity. Some knowledge survives quietly,